I'm Teresa Skubic, and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, January 23rd. We begin tonight with more comments from Donald Trump about Canada becoming the 51st state.
We do. One thing we're going to be demanding is we're going to be demanding respect from other nations. Canada, we have a tremendous deficit with Canada. We're not going to have that anymore. We can't do it. I don't know if it's good for them. As you probably know, I say you can always become a state. And if you're a state, we won't have a deficit. We won't have to tariff you, et cetera, et cetera. But Canada has been very tough to deal with over the years. And it's not fair that we should have a $200 billion or $250 billion deficit. We don't need them to make our cars, and they make a lot of them. We don't need their lumber because we have our own forests, et cetera, et cetera. We don't need their oil and gas. We have more than anybody.
The president made those remarks while speaking virtually at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe says he's not straying from the Team Canada approach in response to U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff threats.
Saskatchewan is supportive of those very small, targeted tariffs that are there to change the minds of U.S. decision makers. What we have seen since last week is some of the language change to broad-based dollar-for-dollar tariffs being counter tariffs being imposed. Saskatchewan's not in support of that. The broad-based counter tariffs are escalating. The entire conversation around tariffs will be hurtful to Canadians and will be hurtful to the entirety of North Americans, and ultimately to that North American energy and food manufacturing security that we want to achieve.
The premiers met virtually with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau after Mr. Trump's inauguration. The U.S. president has said that he's considering implementing 25% tariffs against Canada and Mexico on February 1st. As the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas continues, a spokesperson for Israel's prime minister confirmed this morning that 4 hostages are expected to be returned this Saturday.
As you know, on Sunday, 3 hostages were returned to Israel after being cruelly held by Hamas for 471 days. In this first phase for the release of the hostages, 30 more hostages are expected to return to Israel, most of them alive. 94 hostages remain in Gaza. Media should be aware that four hostages are expected to be released to Israel on Saturday. Yes, this framework for the release of our hostages comes with a heavy price, but Israel has a moral obligation to do everything it can to return all of our hostages home, the living and the murdered.
Israel says that it will maintain control of the Rafah border crossing between Egypt and the Gaza Strip during the first phase of the ceasefire with Hamas. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office denied reports that the Palestinian Authority would control the crossing. This morning, our news director asked Mr. Netanyahu's spokesperson to explain why Israel feels that it needs to keep control of the border.
Okay, first question here from David Clement at the News Forum. Can you elaborate on why Israel feels it must keep control over the border area between Gaza and Egypt? Thank you for that question, David. The Prime Minister has made crystal clear, and the negotiators know this as well, that the Philadelphia corridor was an area where Hamas smuggled the vast majority of its weapons, its rockets, its missiles, and its deadly armaments. Now, they were smuggled overground, but also underground in large tunnels, some of them large enough to put vehicles through. The Prime Minister has made clear, and Israel has made clear, that control over that border is absolutely key, particularly the Philadelphia corridor, to ensure that we stop this smuggling. Now, this has been discussed in the agreement, it is mentioned in the agreement, and there is a protocol for taking those decisions forward.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will fly to Poland next week for events marking 80 years since the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. Mr. Trudeau's office says he'll be traveling on Sunday to Tuesday and visiting the site of the Nazi regime's largest camp, where more than 1 million people were murdered during the Holocaust. He'll be traveling with Canadian Holocaust survivors and Deborah Lyons, the federal envoy for preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism. Mr. Trudeau's office says that he will also be meeting with other Holocaust survivors and taking part in a commemorative event. All right, stay with us. Up next, advocacy groups ask Ottawa to allow transgender refugees in the U.S. to seek asylum in Canada. After that, more of today's top national and international headlines. Refugee advocacy groups are asking Canada's immigration minister to allow transgender refugee claimants in the U.S. to seek asylum in Canada. President Donald Trump used an executive order during his first days back in the office to declare that the U.S. would recognize only two sexes based solely on biological characteristics. The Canadian Council for Refugees says that Mr. Trump's policy can cause harm, like transgender women potentially being placed in detention facilities with male detainees. The head of the Union for BC Indian Chiefs is apologizing for any confusion over his comments about reviving the Northern Gateway Pipeline project. Grand Chief Stuart Phillips' apology comes after he said yesterday that Canada had no choice but to reconsider such projects. He says that the pipeline would have been an absolute disaster for BC's land and waters. Grand Chief Phillips opposed the pipeline in 2016 and says that the answer to the pipeline is still no. Housing Minister Nathaniel Erskine Smith says that Canada has been moving in the wrong direction when it comes to its target of eliminating chronic homelessness by 2030, and that we as a country need to make tackling homelessness a top priority for all governments.
I'd also like to be honest about where we're at, because we have been moving as a country in the wrong direction when it comes to the moving targets of either having chronic homelessness by 2028 or ending chronic homelessness by 2030. In May, the PBO concluded that the best available evidence suggests that homelessness has increased in spite of reaching home, and as a result, the program is not on track to meet its targets with respect to reducing homelessness. The PBO went on to suggest that just having chronic homelessness would require an additional $3.5 billion per year. And seeing our neighbors struggle on our streets, community members denied safe access to our main streets and parks, the growth of homelessness and encampments in communities big and small across our country, it is a crisis. I recognize there are other pressing political priorities. Of course there are. I just want Canadians to know that addressing homelessness is an immediate priority for me, and I will work with any municipality and province to make sure we deliver the right submission in the coming budget.
During his press conference on Wednesday, Mr. Erskine Smith announced that deals have been reached with provinces and territories to price match federal funding to address homelessness. But in Ontario and Saskatchewan, deals were made with some municipalities directly in areas of high need because the federal government and provinces couldn't reach an agreement.
But the fact that the federal government and Ontario weren't able to deliver a deal together, the fact that Ontario didn't cost match that deal, it isn't good enough. We need to put our politics aside when it comes to a crisis. But we need community housing if we want a long-term solution. Housing first. A shelter bed just doesn't offer the stability that we all need. And this is where I want to call on Ontario specifically to do more, because we've seen Ontario increase its homelessness supports. That's a good thing. But they've reduced the amount they spend on community housing by roughly the same amount. Effectively, as we've ramped up federal spending on community and social housing, the Ontario government has seen fit to reduce its own commitments in this space. And we've seen an almost 10% decrease, even when the federal funding has been accounted for.
Caroline Senville, president of a union for some Amazon workers, says that she has no doubt that the company is closing warehouses as part of an anti-union campaign. Amazon has announced it's shutting down all 7 of its Quebec warehouses and going back to third-party companies to deliver packages. Ms. Senville calls the closure unacceptable and says that the union's legal team is considering taking Amazon to the provincial labor board. Speaking at a news conference on Wednesday, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh accused Amazon of union busting and that Canada needs a government that supports workers, which they won't be able to find under Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre.
On Amazon, what's happening in Quebec is very clearly Amazon trying to union bust. These are workers that were trying to unionize, and Amazon is shutting down operations in the complete region, in all of Quebec, just to stop these workers from demanding fairness. And that's why I say again and again, we need a government in this country that is there for workers, for working people. Pierre Poilievre is going to bring in American anti-union, anti-worker laws. It's going to be so bad for workers. We've got to fight back, and this is already an example of what billionaires want to do. They don't want workers to demand fairness. They don't want them to be able to stand up and get better wages and better work conditions. And so what's happening right now in Quebec is horrible. My heart goes out to those workers. This is wrong, what's happening to them. But I really am inspired by the fact that they were trying to fight for their rights. I'm really disappointed, and frankly, it's disgraceful what Amazon's doing.
Amazon spokesperson denies unionization has anything to do with the closures and says it's about being efficient and cost effective. All right, stay tuned. Up next, we'll have our weekly medical segment with Dr. Abhishek Raut. After that, Harjit Sajjan has announced he will not be seeking re-election. We'll have that story and more news right after the break. A new year often signifies a fresh start for many people. For some, this means setting health goals such as losing weight, following a healthier diet, and starting an exercise routine. However, more often than not, the health and wellness resolutions chosen are highly restrictive and unsustainable, leading more people to break the resolutions within a few weeks. This is why many people make the same resolutions year after year. I'm now joined by Dr. Abhishek Raut, Medical Director at Appletree Medical Group, to discuss some healthy New Year's resolutions you can actually keep. Dr. Raut, thanks for joining me today.
Great to be here.
Now, a lot of people want to kick off the new year being healthier, as I mentioned, and that usually starts with diet. Now, what are ways that people can eat healthier, like more whole foods, but do that on a budget? A lot of people struggle with buying those healthier foods because, let's admit, they're very expensive.
I agree. What we are seeing is the prices of whole foods going up considerably there. And there is a reason as well, because we do see that whole foods are minimally processed. They retain most of their natural nutrients. So aiming for a mix of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins, and healthy fats in your diet are very helpful. What you would want to do is focus on nutrient-dense foods. So fruits and vegetables and whole grains are very helpful. Proteins that are lean, so lean meats, fish can be quite helpful in bringing your protein counts out. Legumes, nuts, and seeds. Meal prep is probably one of the most important things that we are seeing as a trend, and which is actually helping quite a bit with cost as well. It helps you have a lot of healthy choices and avoid the temptation of unhealthy snacks. And at the same time, batch preparation of healthy meals can be quite useful in the budget as well. Finally, what I would say is staying hydrated, drinking plenty of water during the day. Sometimes thirst can be mistaken for hunger, and that leads to overeating. So water is really essential for our overall health and also curbing our appetite.
And one of the most popular resolutions is to go and be more active. And this tends to wear off pretty quickly. I can attest to that. Now, what are some things that people who work a desk job, what can they do throughout the day to find ways to move around and get active and get up from sitting?
Right. I think the key here is setting goals that can be used throughout the year, as opposed to very big goals that may not be achievable. Some people will set goals like taking short breaks. So just setting a timer to remind yourself to take a short break every hour, and you can use these breaks to stretch or walk around your office. Some people use desk exercises as a goal. So many exercises you can do right at your desk. Seated leg raises, shoulder shrugs, and neck stretchers can be very helpful here. Using a standing desk. So using a standing desk definitely burns more calories than a seated desk. And standing can also reduce the negative effects of prolonged sitting. Some companies and some meetings also do a walk and talk, which means everyone is walking during their meeting or during their lunch, and that we find that we can increase the activity counts there as well. And then finally, active commute. So if you can walk, perhaps not in this weather, but if you can walk to work, go ahead. If you have a couple of stairs to go into work, take the stairs. And all those little things add up in time to keep our fitness goals in check.
And cutting back on screen time is a resolution that not only a lot of people make, but I think a lot of people need. Why is it so important for people to actually minimize screen time?
I think it's a crucial resolution, really. For many people, it brings out numerous benefits, both physically and mentally, and that's why it's so important. Physically, of course, protecting eye health. We can see a lot of digital eye strain. We see dry eyes, blurry vision, and headaches. Oftentimes, that is the blue light emitted by screens, which can also disrupt our sleep patterns. We see a huge improvement in physical health. So when you decrease screen times, you will naturally decrease a sedentary lifestyle as well. So we see obesity, cardiovascular disease, and poor posture improving when we see a decrease in screen times. Finally, enhancing mental health. We know from a lot of studies, high levels of screen time, especially on social media, have been associated with increased feelings of anxiety, depression, and loneliness. So reducing that screen time can really help improve the mental well-being by allowing more face-to-face interaction and activities that really promote mental health there.
Now, we do have under a minute here, but through the winter months, you've talked about mental health. A lot of people experience burnout and less motivation. How important is getting enough sleep to help you avoid that burnout and actually benefiting your mental health?
Right, so we see this quite a bit. So people complain about not having enough sleep, and sleep is really essential in restoring cognitive function, including memory, learning, and decision making. We know sleep regulates mood. Mood can play a huge role here, and decreased sleep can lead to irritability, anxiety, and depression. Really supports physical health. It helps repair and restore the body. And during sleep, we do have lots of important hormones that are produced, which strengthen our immune system and repairs tissues. We also see actually that there's an increase in productivity and creativity, which is very important, and that helps boost overall performance in general. Now, a lot of people say, well, I try my best to sleep, but how do I get proper sleep? And what we recommend for that is maintain a consistent sleep schedule. Go to bed and wake up at the same time every day, including weekends. Create a relaxing bedtime routine, engage in calming activities, and limit your screen time before bed. Avoid screens at least an hour before you go to bed, and that's going to help reduce the exposure of blue light and promote better sleep.
Dr. Out, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
After throwing his support behind Mark Carney, Emergency Preparedness Minister Harjit Sajjan says he is not seeking re-election. Mr. Sajjan was first elected in Vancouver South in 2015 when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's Liberals swept to power. He is calling on politicians to leave behind the incredibly toxic political landscape and bring back civility by embracing respect for each other. While his name will not be on the ballot, Mr. Sajjan says he will remain a dedicated member of the Liberal Party. British Columbia's Attorney General says that the Supreme Court of Canada has certified the province's class action lawsuit against opioid providers. BC can now proceed as a representative plaintiff on behalf of other Canadian governments. The litigation aims to recover the costs of treating opioid-related diseases allegedly caused by the industry's conduct. Several opioid companies had argued in BC Supreme Court that provinces were overstepping its authority under the Constitution. The Supreme Court of Canada has agreed to hear a challenge of Quebec's secularism law known as Bill 21. The 2019 law prohibits civil servants in positions of authority, including teachers and police officers, from wearing religious symbols on the job. Last year, the Quebec Court of Appeal upheld the law. Groups including the National Council of Canadian Muslims, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, and the English Montreal School Board sought leave to appeal that decision. The Pentagon says it's begun deploying 1,500 active duty troops to help secure the southern border. It puts in motion plans that President Trump laid out in executive order shortly after he took office.
All illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came. We will reinstate my Remain in Mexico policy.
Acting Defense Secretary Robert Salsis says that the troops will fly helicopters to assist Border Patrol agents and help in the construction of barriers. The Pentagon will also provide military aircraft to support deportation flights for more than 5,000 detained migrants. The U.S. House has passed a bill to require the detainment of unauthorized migrants accused of theft and violent crimes.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business to vote on the passage of Senate Bill 5, on which the nays and yeas are ordered. Clerk will report the title.
Senate 5, an act to require the Secretary of Homeland Security to take into custody aliens who have been charged in the United States with theft and for other purposes.
Vote. The yeas are 263 and the nays are 156. The bill passed.
It marks the first legislation that Donald Trump can sign as Congress, with some bipartisan support, swiftly moved in line with his plans to crack down on illegal immigration. The Laken-Riley Act is named after a Georgia nursing student who was murdered last year by a Venezuelan man. Saudi Arabia's crown prince says the kingdom wants to invest $600 billion in the United States over the next 4 years. The comments from Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, reported today by the state-run Saudi press agency, came in a phone call with U.S. President Donald Trump. On Monday after his inauguration, Mr. Trump mused about possibly heading to the kingdom again as his first foreign trip, as he did in 2017. Firefighters are battling to maintain the upper hand on a vast and rapidly moving wildfire that swept through rugged mountains north of Los Angeles yesterday.
The Hughes fire is now estimated to be over 9,400 acres with 0% containment, with no structures reported damaged or destroyed. We have over 4,000 firefighting personnel assigned to the incident, and we had a very robust ground and air response to the incident that you see behind me.
The new Hughes fire has resulted in more than 50,000 people being put under evacuation orders or warnings, and a parched Southern California could get some badly needed rain this weekend. Nominees for the 97th Annual Academy Awards were announced today, and a number of nominees have roots here in Canada. Toronto's Linda Muir has received an Oscar nod for Best Costume Design for her work on the film Nosferatu. In addition, Canada's Julie Brave, Noise Cat, and Toronto journalist Emily Cassie has received an Oscar nomination for Best Documentary Feature for their film Sugarcane, and Canadian Denis Villeneuve's film Dune Part 2 has been nominated for Best Picture. I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you can always visit our website at thenewsforum.ca and make sure to follow us on social media. You can also watch all of our commentary programming on the News Forum YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us on Forum Daily News. We'll see you next time. Good night, Canada.